Some shortcuts aren't worth the risk, especially when something waits in the shadows. The stories about Gray Hollow Alley were whispered in hushed tones around Oak Ridge High. Students swore it was haunted, though no one could agree on what lurked there. Some said it was a faceless man. Others claimed it was a shadow that moved on its own. The only constant was the warning: never walk through the alley after dark. Jamie didn't believe in urban legends. As the school's star track athlete, she prided herself on being fearless. So, when her friend Brooke dared her to take the shortcut through Gray Hollow Alley on their way home, Jamie laughed. "Fine," Jamie said, adjusting her backpack. "But you owe me lunch if nothing happens." Brooke hesitated. "Maybe we should just go around." "Scared?" Jamie teased. "No," Brooke said quickly, though her eyes darted to the alley's entrance. The narrow passage was flanked by brick walls covered in graffiti. It stretched for a few hundred feet before disappearing into shadows. "Let's go," Jamie said, stepping into the darkness. The alley was quiet, save for the faint hum of a distant streetlight. Brooke stuck close to Jamie, her footsteps hurried. "See? Nothing here," Jamie said, her voice echoing faintly. She turned to Brooke, who was staring straight ahead, her face pale. "What?" Jamie asked, following her friend's gaze. At the far end of the alley, a figure stood motionless. It was a man, tall and thin, wearing a tattered coat and a wide-brimmed hat. His face was obscured by shadow, but Jamie could feel his gaze fixed on them. "Probably just some guy," Jamie said, though her voice wavered. "Come on." As they moved closer, the man didn't budge. His stillness was unnatural, like a statue carved into the alley itself. "Excuse us," Jamie said loudly, her confidence faltering. The man didn't respond. Instead, he tilted his head, the movement slow and deliberate, as if he were studying them. "Let's turn back," Brooke whispered, gripping Jamie's arm. "No," Jamie said, though her pulse quickened. She wasn't about to let some weirdo scare her. They stepped forward. The man tilted his head again, this time in the opposite direction. Then, he took a single step toward them. Jamie froze. The man's step was impossibly slow, yet the sound of his foot hitting the pavement echoed like thunder. He took another step, and Jamie noticed something horrifying. His legs didn't bend. They moved like stiff, mechanical rods, his joints locked in place. "Run," Brooke whispered, tears streaming down her face. Jamie hesitated. She wanted to prove she wasn't afraid, but the man's movements were all wrong. Another step brought him closer, his head tilting again, almost mockingly. Then, he raised a hand, his fingers long and spindly, pointing directly at Jamie. That was enough. Jamie grabbed Brooke's arm, and they bolted. The sound of their shoes slapping against the pavement was drowned out by the rhythmic clanging of footsteps behind them. Jamie risked a glance over her shoulder and nearly stumbled. The man was moving faster now, his rigid legs carrying him forward in jarring, unnatural strides. They reached the end of the alley, bursting onto the sidewalk. Jamie spun around, expecting to see the man still chasing them. But the alley was empty. The only sound was their ragged breathing. "Where did he go?" Brooke asked, her voice trembling. Jamie shook her head. She didn't have an answer. The next day, Jamie couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. At school, she caught glimpses of a shadowy figure in the corner of her eye, but when she turned, no one was there. Brooke refused to talk about the alley, avoiding Jamie altogether. That night, Jamie heard a knock at her bedroom window. She lived on the second floor. Her heart pounding, she pulled back the curtain. The man in the hat stood on the ground below, his face still hidden in shadow. Slowly, he raised a hand and pointed at her. Jamie screamed, stumbling back. When she looked again, he was gone. The legend of Gray Hollow Alley persisted, with new details added each year. But Jamie never spoke of her encounter again. Some say she left town to escape the man's gaze. Others believe she's still being watched, wherever she goes. Would you have walked through Gray Hollow Alley? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more tales that make you think twice about shortcuts. Until next time, stay in the light. What if the one thing you wanted most came at the cost of everything else? The antique shop was tucked away in a forgotten corner of the city, its sign faded and barely legible. Clara had passed it dozens of times without noticing, but on this rainy afternoon, something drew her in. She couldn't explain it, a pull, a whisper at the edge of her thoughts, urging her to step inside. The shop was cluttered with relics of the past, tarnished candlesticks, cracked porcelain dolls, and shelves of dusty books. But it was the mirror that caught Clara's eye. It stood in the center of the room, its ornate, golden frame gleaming despite the dim light. The glass was pristine, almost unnaturally so, reflecting her image with perfect clarity. "Beautiful, isn't it?" said the shopkeeper, an elderly man with a voice as creaky as the floorboards. Clara nodded. "How much?" The man's eyes narrowed. "That mirror is special. It's said to grant your heart's deepest desire, but at a cost." Clara laughed nervously. "Isn't everything?" He didn't smile. "Take it if you want, but remember this. Never look into it after dark." She hesitated, but her curiosity won out. After haggling down the price, she carried the mirror home, its weight heavier than she expected. The mirror fit perfectly in Clara's bedroom, its gilded frame gleaming against the pale walls. That evening, as she unpacked her bags, she couldn't resist standing in front of it. "What's my deepest desire?" she whispered, almost mockingly. The reflection shimmered. Clara gasped as the image of her small, cluttered room morphed into something else, a luxurious penthouse, filled with elegant furniture and glowing with soft, golden light. She saw herself, dressed in a designer gown, her hair styled to perfection. On the table beside her was a pile of crisp $100 bills. "It's just my imagination," she said, stepping away. But deep down, she couldn't shake the image. The next morning, Clara woke to find an envelope on her nightstand. Inside was a check for $500, a payment for a freelance project she'd forgotten about. Over the next few days, more opportunities seemed to fall into her lap. A promotion at work, a raffle win, and even an invitation to an exclusive gala. Her life was transforming, just as the mirror had shown. She couldn't resist standing in front of it again. Each time, the visions grew grander: wealth, love, admiration. She was mesmerized, spending hours gazing into its depths, dreaming of the life she craved. But then, one night, she forgot the shopkeeper's warning. It was a stormy evening, the wind howling outside as Clara returned from the gala. She was exhilarated, dressed in a gown that cost more than her rent, her arms heavy with gifts and compliments from admirers. She stood before the mirror, her heart racing. "Show me more," she whispered. The glass shimmered, and for a moment, she saw herself surrounded by everything she had ever wanted. But then the image darkened, her reflection twisted, the beautiful Clara replaced by a hollow-eyed version of herself, her face pale and gaunt. "What?" Clara stepped back, her voice trembling. The figure in the mirror smiled, a slow, chilling grin. "You asked for everything. Now it's my turn." The room grew cold, and Clara's breath fogged the air. The figure reached out, its hand pressing against the glass. Slowly, impossibly, it began to emerge. Clara screamed, stumbling backward as the doppelganger stepped into the room, its movements jerky and unnatural. "You wanted my life," it said, its voice echoing with a hollow, metallic ring. "Now you'll take mine." The last thing Clara saw was her own terrified face reflected in the mirror as the doppelganger lunged. When Clara's neighbors entered her apartment the next day, they found it empty. The mirror stood in its usual place, its surface cracked and dull. The golden frame seemed to have tarnished overnight, its gleam replaced by a sickly, greenish hue. The antique shopkeeper shook his head when he heard the news. "She didn't listen," he muttered, closing up his shop. The mirror remains in Clara's apartment to this day, waiting for its next owner. And when they look into its depths, they'll see more than just their reflection. What would you have wished for if you owned the Mirror of Sorrows? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more haunting tales. Until next time, remember, some desires are best left unfulfilled. Some warnings are meant to be heeded, especially when they come from the dead. Every town has its ghost story, but in Stone Hollow, it was the Overpass Phantom. The legend spoke of a shadowy figure that appeared beneath the old railway bridge on Highway 47. They said if you stopped your car there at night, you'd hear whispers warning you to leave. Those who ignored the warning often didn't make it home. Casey thought it was all nonsense. A high school senior with a penchant for thrill-seeking, she loved proving people wrong. So when her friends dared her to drive to the overpass and wait for the phantom, she didn't hesitate. "I'll even stay longer than 5 minutes," she boasted, tossing her keys in the air. The night was cold and moonless as she drove down the empty stretch of road. Her headlights barely cut through the thick fog that seemed to gather as she neared the overpass. The bridge loomed ahead, its rusted beams and graffiti-covered walls almost swallowed by the dark. Casey parked her car directly beneath it, the engine idling as she waited. Minutes passed, and nothing happened. Casey tapped her fingers on the steering wheel, glancing at the clock on her dashboard. "Figures," she muttered. "Bunch of scaredy cats." Just as she reached for the gear shift, a sound caught her attention. It was faint at first, like a low whisper carried on the wind. She froze, her hand hovering over the gear stick. The whispering grew louder, overlapping voices murmuring in an unintelligible chant. A chill ran down her spine. Casey turned off the engine, rolling down her window to listen. The voices seemed to be coming from the bridge itself, reverberating through the steel beams. She squinted into the fog, her heart racing. "Hello," she called out, her voice trembling. The whispers stopped. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, a single word echoed through the stillness: "Leave." Casey's breath caught in her throat. She fumbled to start the engine, her fingers shaking. But as the headlights flickered to life, she saw it. A shadowy figure standing in the middle of the road, just beyond the bridge. It was tall and featureless, its edges shifting like smoke. "What the?" Casey whispered, her pulse pounding in her ears. The shadow began to move toward her, its form growing more defined with each step. Casey threw the car into reverse, her tires screeching against the asphalt. But no matter how far she backed up, the shadow seemed to stay the same distance away, as if tethered to her. Desperate, she slammed the car into drive and sped forward, aiming to swerve around it. But as she passed under the overpass, the shadow vanished. Her relief was short-lived. From the corner of her eye, Casey caught movement in the passenger seat. She turned her head, and her stomach dropped. The shadow was there, sitting beside her, its empty face inches from hers. Its voice filled the car, a guttural whisper that made her ears ache. "You were warned." Casey screamed, losing control of the wheel. The car skidded off the road and into a ditch, coming to a jarring halt. Dazed, she looked around. The shadow was gone. The next morning, a passing driver found Casey's car abandoned beneath the overpass. The doors were locked, and there was no sign of her. The only clue was a single word scratched into the fogged-up window on the passenger side: "Leave." Locals say the overpass phantom claimed another victim that night, a warning to those who dare to test the legend. And now, when the fog rolls in on Highway 47, drivers swear they see a shadow lingering near the bridge, waiting for its next victim. Would you dare stop at the overpass? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more chilling tales from the shadows. Until next time, drive carefully and listen to the warnings. Not all works of art are meant to be admired. Some are meant to be feared. In the heart of Blackridge Park stood an old marble statue known as the Weeping Scholar. It depicted a robed figure, head bowed, with one hand raised as though gesturing for silence. Locals whispered that the statue had a sinister reputation. Those who dared touch it at night would hear it whisper their darkest secrets. For years, it was a favorite spot for dares among teens, but few actually braved its presence. Most would chicken out at the last second, claiming they felt watched. But for Sarah and her best friend, Lily, the legend was just a silly ghost story. "Let's prove it wrong," Sarah said, gripping her phone flashlight as they walked through the park one chilly autumn night. Lily hesitated, pulling her jacket tighter around herself. "This feels like a bad idea." "What? Are you scared of a hunk of stone?" Sarah teased. Lily rolled her eyes, but said nothing. The statue loomed ahead, illuminated by the pale glow of the park's dim streetlights. Even in the faint light, its features seemed eerily lifelike, the folds of the robe so detailed they looked soft to the touch. "All right, here goes nothing," Sarah said, stepping up to the statue. She glanced at Lily. "You ready?" Lily nodded, though her face betrayed her fear. Sarah reached out and placed her hand on the cold marble. At first, nothing happened. Sarah turned to Lily with a triumphant grin. "See? Just a statue." But then she felt it, a faint vibration beneath her palm. She froze, her smile fading. "Do you feel that?" Sarah whispered. "Feel what?" Lily asked, her voice trembling. Before Sarah could answer, a soft whisper filled the air, so faint it could have been mistaken for the wind. But it wasn't. The voice was low and raspy, speaking directly into Sarah's ear. "Why did you lie?" it hissed. Sarah's breath caught. She yanked her hand away, stumbling back. "Did you hear that?" she asked, her voice shaking. "Hear what?" Lily asked, her eyes wide with concern. "It spoke to me," Sarah said. "It knows something." "What are you talking about?" Lily asked. "You're scaring me." Sarah shook her head, trying to steady her breathing. I'm Fine. Let's just go." But as they turned to leave, the whisper came again, louder this time. "You can't run from the truth." The voice echoed in Sarah's head all the way home. That night, as she lay in bed, she couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she felt the cold touch of the marble, heard the accusing whisper. When she finally drifted off, she dreamed of the statue. In her dream, it wasn't standing still. It moved, its marble hand reaching out to grab her, its head lifting to reveal hollow, empty eyes. She woke with a start, drenched in sweat. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand, startling her. It was a text from Lily. "Lily, I can't stop hearing it. What did you do to me?" Heart pounding, Sarah typed back, "I didn't do anything. Are you okay?" But there was no response. The next day, Lily didn't show up to school. Sarah tried calling, but it went straight to voicemail. That evening, she biked to Lily's house, only to find it dark and silent. The whispers seemed to follow her, growing louder as she passed the park. Against her better judgment, she stopped at the statue. "What do you want from me?" she shouted, her voice breaking. The park was silent, save for the rustling of leaves. Then, the statue's head shifted ever so slightly, just enough for her to notice. Its hand, once raised in silence, now pointed directly at her. "Confess," the whisper commanded. Terrified, Sarah fell to her knees, tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry," she sobbed. "Elite, I cheated on the history exam. Okay, I'm sorry." The whispering stopped. The air grew still, the oppressive weight lifting from her chest. The statue's hand returned to its original position, and its head bowed once more. Sarah never spoke of that night again. Lily moved away shortly after, and though they never reconnected, Sarah heard rumors that Lily was still haunted by whispers. As for Sarah, she avoided Blackridge Park entirely. But the Weeping Scholar remains, watching and waiting for the next visitor foolish enough to touch its cold marble surface. And when they do, it will know their secrets too. Would you dare touch the Weeping Scholar? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more chilling tales that will keep you awake at night. Until next time, be careful what you confess.